WebEx? Okay, thank you. Next, a request for bill introductions. Are there any bills that would like to be presented? Well, everybody sat there and grinned, so okay. Okay, so we have no bills today, but I know they're coming, so. So we have a presentation today on coal in Kansas. So we got Randy Eminger here from Electric Reliability and Coal Power Consultant and President of Eminger LLC. So Randy, if you please come to the podium, state your name, and thank you for coming because I think you actually live in Arkansas, isn't it, Randy?
That's true.
Yeah, so you come a long way to do this, so thank you.
Not bad at all, no, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As the chairman said, he got me a new president, so I should feel good. No, I'm surprised to still be standing after the last administration, but we are an important part of our nation's electric supply. We're still 20% of the electricity in the U.S. and 28% of the electricity in the state of Kansas. So I thought I'd like to just run through a few slides, talk a little bit about where we're at in the state of Kansas and the Southwest Power Pool, which you're very well aware you're a part of. I would start out by just showing over the last decade, back in 2014, 58% of the electricity in the state of Kansas came from coal, 22 from wind. That's pretty much flip-flopped to the opposite now. We're at 47%, as you can see on the pie chart on the right, comes in wind capacity that you have in the state. 28% is coal fuel generation, 8% natural gas, and then 18% is nuclear generation that you have in the state. The same has been happening in the Southwest Power Pool. What you'll see in this chart is basically the blue line is coal, which is trending down from 2012, where we're now 27% of the electric generation in the Southwest Power Pool. As you'll recall, the Southwest Power Pool is 14 states, mainly running from North Dakota down through Louisiana. And then you'll see the green line, which is the wind generation, which has gone up dramatically and is now 37% of the total generation for the Southwest Power. This is out of your Kansas Corporation Commission website, and it just basically shows last year. Am I not on? Sorry, okay. I talk real loud anyway. It's hard of hearing. Last year, you generated a little over 50% of your electricity in the state of Kansas from wind, and about 24% of that electricity came from coal fuel generation. So basically, a little over half was wind generation last year. There is in the Southwest Power Pool what they call capacity factors. This is the amount of electricity that they expect you to be able to generate if they needed up to 90% of what your capacity or your nameplate capacity is on your power plant or your wind turbine that you have out there. So basically, they broke it down by summer, winter, fall, and spring. I just want to note that most of the gas and the coal runs somewhere between 65 to 70% capacity factor year round. Nuclear is the highest, of course. You run it constantly and all the time, flat out, and it's at 95%. Wind and solar, especially solar, has problems in the fall. A lot of cloud cover, longer nights, shorter days, so it's down to 13%. Winter down to 16%, where wind is in the 40s on an average and runs from 31% to 46% capacity factor availability. The next slide basically shows, I just took this off the website of Southwest Power Pool 2 days ago. It's very cold, as you know. 2 a.m. in the morning, and it shows from the tan or orange color that coal produced 42% of the electricity. Within the Southwest Power Pool, gas 23% and wind at 28%. We're very fortunate during this cold spell that it's also windy as well. So we're getting the generation from wind. Sometimes that's not the case.
Mr. Chairman, a point of order. I think he left solar off here.
Solar, sorry. It's a very, very small amount, but I can sure add it to it. I think it's, okay. I would like to kind of touch base on, just so you know, I don't want folks to think I'm dreaming up a reliability crisis in any way. This is our Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The three commissioners all stated last year before Congress that we're really running out of power and we're going to end up in a tough situation in different parts of the U.S. The new chairman, Mark Christie, stated power plants are retiring faster than we're replacing them, and the math just doesn't work. Even Willie Phillips, the appointee from the Biden administration, said we're facing unprecedented challenges with reliability in our nation's electric system. This is a map from what a group called the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They have Canada as part of their region as well. And this study that came out last month in December basically looked at what is the shortfall and the risk of running out of power in different parts of the U.S. Of course, the red part there, which is MISO, which is to the east of you, mainly eastern Missouri, on up through Michigan, Minnesota, a number of those states, Illinois. They're in what is the very high-risk area. The tan or orange-looking color is called an elevated risk, which basically Southwest Power Pool says that elevated risk is that they have potential of energy shortfalls during peak summer and peak winter times if you have low wind and you have problems with natural gas deliverability. So that was done just last month, and they look at starting in 2025, which is now, the Southwest Power Pool is at an elevated risk. This one's hard to read, and I apologize for that. It's also Southwest Power Pool, but they have a reserve margin that they try to keep. They look at the peak amount of electricity in the summer and winter, and then they say we want a reserve margin of 12% above that. They had that for up until 2023, and you'll see the red dotted line jumps up to 15% reserve margin now that they require within the Southwest Power Pool. The blue line dropping is the power plants that are coming offline and retiring, and so you're getting closer and closer. Actually, in 2026, it shows no longer will the utilities in the Southwest Power Pool or the generation in the Southwest Power Pool be able to meet the 15% reserve margin if we continue to look at closing plants at the rate they're closing. What we've seen over the last 6 years in the Southwest Power Pool is 15 power plants closed, 1 nuclear plant, 7 coal plants, and 7 natural gas plants. A total of 4,700 megawatts, equivalent to powering 2.2 million average size homes. What's more stark is in the next 6 years, you're going to see another 9 that have been listed to close or announced to close base load power plants for 5,700 megawatts or 2.4 million average homes by 2031. This is a list of those 9 power plants that are planning on closing. Again, it's a large amount of electricity. one will be closed this year, which is a Harrington plant up in the panhandle of Texas. Then you have some in Nebraska that are looking at closing next year, and in Oklahoma in 2026 as well. Then a couple more you're looking at down in East Texas that are looking at closing. The ones in red that are highlighted are Kansas coal-fueled power plants. What also causes somewhat of a perfect storm is that when you look at what the Southwest Power Pool says will be built or has been announced to be built over the next 7 years, they show that basically the orange you'll see in this circle is solar. The green is wind, and then you have a hybrid. The 14% yellow is a combination of solar with battery backup or wind with battery backup, and then the purple is a battery storage. What you see is only 13%. The light blue is actually a base load. Most of it's natural gas generation. But what we're looking at now, and that could very easily change from day to day or year to year, but right now they show that only 13% of the new generation coming online will be base load. Well, we got hit with basically in 2023 and 2024 were 7 major EPA regulations aimed at coal fuel generation. The biggest, as you'll see, is 111 carbon, which was a rule out by EPA. None of these were passed these increases were passed by Congress. They were just implemented by the EPA. The carbon rule was very devastating to coal fuel generation, although it doesn't go into effect until 2032. As you know, utilities have to plan out 10, 15 years in the future. And if they have a carbon rule that says you'll either capture all the carbon from that plant or close it by 2032, it puts a shocking effect on coal fuel power plants. You should note that natural gas was a big part of these rules and still is until they're reversed by the current administration. But under natural gas, it required that a new natural gas plant had to sequester or capture 50% of its CO2 by 2032 as well. So anyone looking at building a new natural gas plant has a very tough time looking at that because carbon capture is very expensive. There's 2 plants in the U.S. that are doing that, but CO2 is very hard and expensive to capture. There's also some states that have implemented net zero or zero carbon regulations. This shows the various ones. Some of them are state statutes. Some of them are just governor's executive orders. But again, under SPP and the Southwest Power Pool, your region, there's a few states, Louisiana, Montana, New Mexico, and you've just annexed into the Southwest Power Pool, Colorado and Wyoming. So they're now a new part of Southwest Power Pool. So when you have states that have rules that said they're going to eliminate all fossil fuels, and that some of them have laws that say that by 2040, 2045, it really puts a lot of pressure on those states that still do have fossil fuels and do not have a zero carbon requirement, because everybody within the Southwest Power Pool is sharing power. This is a map of the Southwest Power Pool. The light red is the current area that they've served for years and years and decades. They've just now annexed what the dark red part of the map shows, which will be part of your region. I would point out, especially Colorado, that has a law on the books that said they'll be 100% fossil fuel free by 2040. Currently, their coal is 31% of the generation, and natural gas is another 27% of their generation. So 58% of their generation is basically carbon-based, yet they say they're going to be 100% carbon-free in the next 15 years. Basically, I think states like that really needed to join the Southwest Power Pool so they could have emergency power and some options to try to get to their goal in 2040. One of the things we've also seen is basically it's been very hard to get permitting for new generation of any type, to get siting and construction. There's been a problem with wind and solar as far as parts from China and other countries in South America. COVID caused some problems there with with receiving those on time. The one I'd look at here is the natural gas combined cycle, and you'll see the red, which means it's canceled. These are gas plants that were in line to be built over the last 2 years, but have now announced over 10,000 megawatts of generation that's been canceled. There's still a lot of solar and still a lot of natural gas and wind being planned, as well as you can see the battery storage there as well. Under the under the wind, you can see that components, 11,000 megawatts of wind generation has been postponed by over 12 months because of the backlog and supply chain problems that we've run into. This map shows natural gas plants that are being constructed or trying to be constructed, permitted across the U.S. 133 natural gas plants are currently either in the permitting, siting, or early construction stage. The only reason I put this up as a slide is because if all 133 come online, you can imagine the price of natural gas, especially in the eastern part of the U.S., will go up dramatically as demand goes up. Transmission lines has also been a concern. There's been delays on permitting and, of course, land disputes on getting a right-of-way for transmission. Currently, NERC says it takes between 8 and 14 years to get a major high voltage transmission line in place. So there's been some concerns there. There was 1,200 miles constructed last year. Finally, I would show that the amount of need for power is going up. Again, this is Southwest Power Pool, and it shows both in the summer peak and the winter peak how it continued to grow and get higher and higher. It's the economy continues to grow. AI continues to add to that. A lot of data centers that have gone in. There's currently in the U.S. today 2,700 data centers, and projections are, this is from an EPRI report, that data centers currently take up 4% of the electricity in the U.S., and by next year, 2026, it'll grow to 6% of all the electricity in the U.S. will go to data centers. It's growing rapidly, and they say they'll reach 35,000 megawatts by 2030. That's a growth up from 17,000 megawatts in 2022. So there's a rapid growth, and how they're going to find all the power to power all the AI, I'm not sure, but that's adding to the problem of having enough electric generation. I'll turn a little bit of specific Kansas information. This is just average retail price for 2023. That's the latest we have. Kansas is the red bar there, and it shows that you're 13% below the national average, which is good, but you're above 15% above Oklahoma and 17% above Nebraska, which are a couple of your neighbors. Pretty well the same as your neighbor to the east, Missouri. Your prices are pretty close to the same. But what's happened, and this is over from 2010 2010 through 2023, you can see coal generation has dropped in Kansas and electric prices have increased. And I'm not saying there's a one-to-one correlation with this, but if you hear someone say closing a coal plant and building wind will lower the rates in the state, it's not necessarily the situation, or at least the chart shows that it's not necessarily the situation. I've also showed the fuel price between natural gas and coal. We'd have no problem with natural gas at all, but you need to know that the price does fluctuate quite a bit with natural gas. Although if you have plenty of gas in the state of Kansas, it might not fluctuate as much as it does. But this is the Kansas fuel price. And you can go back even 2 or 3 decades, and the price of coal has remained very steady throughout the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2000 and teens. Whereas it's somewhat fluctuates with natural gas at times. Again, this is just a list of the coal plants in Kansas, and it does show the retirement dates on the right of the Lawrence plant. Of course, Lawrence was built, first unit in 1960, so it's very old. We usually say a coal plant is about 65 years, 65 years is the age we're looking at on most of them. You can keep them up. There are coal plants in Ohio that are well over 70 years old, but you keep them maintained, you keep efficiencies and new turbines, new boilers in place, they can run for a long time. But again, these are the closure dates currently, and those can change year to year as the electric utility files its integrated resource plan. Those can move forward and back. I have just finish up with some environmental news. It's good news for the state of Kansas. Basically, the 2 major components, or 3, from a coal fuel power plant. One is sulfur emissions, or sulfur dioxide emissions. You've dropped those by 97% in the state. A lot of that is that you've put scrubbers on all your coal plants, but part of it is because you've closed, some of this reduction is from closing coal plants as well. The second one is NOx, or NOx emissions, have dropped by 88% since 2001 in the state. Again, these are 2 criteria, health-related pollutants under the EPA, that they consider health-related air pollutants that contribute to ozone, ground level ozone. And then finally, this is CO2, although it's not necessarily something that is health-related. It's more related to global warming or climate change. CO2 is something that every time we exhale, we breathe out CO2. Your state has lowered CO2 by 52% from the 2005. That was the baseline under the Obama administration and the Biden administration. And most recent, the Biden administration wanted to reduce CO2 by 52% by 2030. Kansas is already there. And the reduction is not from adding controls, it's from closing the plants, actually, is where that 52% reduction come from. I had to throw in this at the end of it, but my favorite cartoon is the Roadrunner, and sometimes I think states are headed for disaster, and especially Southwest Power Pool has to look at where it's headed. Of course, Southwest Power Pool cannot tell a utility or state they can or cannot close a baseload power plant. So it's strictly up to the Corporation Commission and the utilities as to whether a plant is closed or not. At the risk of shooting myself, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Senator Clays.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today. I really enjoyed this in a dour sort of way. It's you're speaking my language. This is one of the issues and axes that I grind is that, you know, with electric cars hitting the grid, and of course with AI hitting the grid, that, you know, we're not at a normal time. And then at the same time, as you mentioned, because of environmental concerns, we're shutting down plants. So, you know, losing one side and getting on the other, that balance sheet isn't balancing, is it? Anyway, I welcome you from Arkansas, and in Kansas we call ourselves Kansans. What do you guys call yourself in Arkansas?
Arkansans.
Arkansans, interesting. That's you've given me a lot to think about here, and I appreciate that. So what is your proposal to get us out of this ditch that we're heading towards? Because it's obvious that that's the case, and I don't think a lot of people know it. I mean, you are definitely ringing the bell. Perhaps even a little late, but it's, you know, I agree. The forecasts don't look great, and I have no issue with coal. I think that, you know, we should use the scrubbers and do whatever we can there. But I'm actually more of a nuclear person, but no offense, but I do think we need to go in that direction too. I like the idea of having all of the legs of the stool, you know, a 12-legged stool or whatever, like just a little bit of everything. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Senator, I think under the new administration that the permitting time is going to drop off. So one is to build new generation as quickly as we can. But the other part is not to close existing generation too soon. And we found in several states have passed a language that says before you close an existing plant, you have to have the new generation, dispatchable generation, constructed and operating before you close the existing. That's not in Kansas legislation now. So I guess one of the things is to make sure before you close a plant, the new generation is up and running. And then the other is we're going to have to, whether it's nuclear, small modular nuclear, whether it's natural gas, and wind and solar, all of it, we need to be able to construct. The pipeline permitting problems have been massive. You haven't been able to get gas to certain places where they're wanting to build gas fuel generation and that sort of thing. So hopefully, hopefully we can get some things up and going, because AI is not waiting around. They're competing with each other and they're building these things fast.
Sure.
Another thing, you know, seeing Colorado added, and I am new to this, so I don't know how all of that comes about and why we're strapped to them now. But nonetheless, it does seem to me that you could be sending them just our wind power, because I don't know if this is true of everyone, but I have Evergy where I live, and I can actually select to just receive. I mean, obviously it's all on the grid, but you know, the clean power is actually an option. I don't know if everybody knows that, but if that's a concern for folks, and anyway, is there a way around it that way where, you know, we're just, so to speak, sending them the wind piece of that, or am I asking a dumb question because I don't really understand how this works?
All I can say, and I'd let the utility or SPP answer that, but electrons move at the speed of light. So it's either on or it's not. I can't say that this is an electron from a wind turbine or not, unless it's their house is right next to it. But that'd be an interesting if you'd say, okay, you're getting the wind. But what I see is they want states like this to be their backup battery as they continue to do away with their fossil fuels. And they're going to need somebody to help them out. And that's kind of the way I look.
Okay, next we got Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Eminger. I know you're a coal guy, but I wanted you to tell me the difference between the combined cycle gas and the simple cycle gas generation.
Sure.
I don't know what that
is. Combined cycle, whenever you use a steam turbine, the steam on a simple cycle simply goes out. It's cooled down, but it goes out in mist. You see the big clouds. Combined cycle captures that waste heat from the steam and brings it back through the turbine a second time, so it makes it more efficient. You get more electricity with less gas.
Make another point, Mr. Chairman. I went on an energy tour to Hanover, Germany, and Berlin this summer. and they were paying about 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Their industry is going to be decimated because the Russians took care of the gas, Angela Merkel took care of the nukes, and they are closing all their coal fire. I know you didn't mention hydrogen at all. They look to North Sea wind and hydrogen to save them, but I think we all could learn a lesson from what's happening in Germany.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bowser?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Imminger, for being here today. Just two questions. Help me understand what happens if we fall below the 15% power reserve here. Does that mean if there's a rolling, or does that mean that if there's a spike in temperature, there would be rolling blackouts in the Southwest power grid?
Well, you'd have to drop below, not below the 15%, but below zero to have that happen. Now, you're tied in, Southwest Power Pool has some interconnects with MISO and some into the west. So you would try to import. The problem you get into if you have a winter storm Uri, like we did in 2021, that is not just located in a few states, but goes almost nationwide, then every state saying, no, we have to have our own electricity and our own customers. So you end up in a situation with rolling blackouts like you did in Texas, where it was 5 days with 247 deaths associated with the blackouts alone.
One more quick question, Mr. Chairman. Who determines, I heard you say Wyoming and Colorado were added to the Southwest Power Pool. Who determines that? Is there a Southwest Power Pool board that admits a state would make a request to join this power pool and a board would approve them?
Yes, and there's one representative from each state, one representative from your corporation commission. I believe his name is French, who is on the board of the Southwest Power Pool. So they vote as to whether they expand or don't.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate seeing you here again as usual. And I thought the requirement from the EPA was they had to start complying by January 1st, 2030, unless they rescinded that here recently, which means we're accelerating the closure of these coal plants in anticipation of having to start complying with that.
Right.
And if this report doesn't scare the devil out of people, I don't know what would with regard to this stuff. But yes, the Southwest Power Pool doesn't tell the state, but they're accepting these mandates for, taking on wind and solar. I guess my question is, from the coal industry standpoint, yeah, the Trump administration might clamp down on these EP rules and rescind them, at least temporarily. But when the pendulum swings back, to another administration that's done the same detrimental things that the Biden administration has done, what gives the coal industry any confidence that they're not going to be facing those same things in 4 years?
It doesn't, Senator. I mean, we've gone through a roller coaster up and down, from Obama through the first Trump administration and back and forth. The industry, as you know, is kind of long-term. You don't open or start mining unless you know you have a market out there in front of you. So in Wyoming, I work with the mining companies quite a bit, and it's very much a struggle for them to try to figure out what the market's going to do over the next 7, 8, 10 years because of the cost of opening a new mine or expanding. The Biden administration lockdown said no more leasing of coal mining on federal lands. Well, 80% of all the coal produced that comes here or is mined in Wyoming is on federal lands. So their current mining, they have enough to get through 2041, which is another 16 years. But if that stayed in place, all coal mines in Wyoming essentially 80% of them would be shut down. So we do look at ways. The Supreme Court's made some rulings on the Chevron deference and other things that we think will help us moving forward.
Yeah, and to Senator Clifford's point, Germany should be instructive to everyone because they went this way a long time ago with the wind and the gas, basically. And you see what's happened to their electric rates. We can't do that. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Senator Holcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need a little clarification. This kind of goes to Senator Bowser's point earlier. I believe you mentioned that everyone in the Southwest Power Pool is sharing power, but there's a divide between the Eastern and Western interconnect.
Yes.
Correct? So Kansas wouldn't be impacted necessarily by Colorado's coal, correct?
Well, there's a couple of interconnects into the west. They're not huge. They're looking at expanding those interconnects. But currently, no. I mean, currently it's just small interconnects between the west and Southwest Power Pool are not huge. I mean, they're limited at this point.
Yeah, so we really can't do a lot of shipping of power to.
Not currently. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm working on getting a Southwest Power Pool here too, here in a week or two. So these would be good questions for that, is what I'm saying. Next on the list is Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard you say something earlier, and if I heard it correct, your implication was that it was the EPA that had, by fiat, decided to control things. Now that we've got a president that knows what day of the week it is there much chance that the president could significantly change things, or do you see any appetite in Congress to rein in the out-of-control EPA? I'll ask that question, that's one, and then two, I'll ask it so then I won't have to get permission. The Southwest Power Pool, I don't understand why they're, if you will, jumping the gun on what the EPA requirements are, if I'm hearing the dates correctly. Why are they just woke? I mean, why are they rushing to shut down reliable power plants when they don't have another source ready immediately to just, if you will, flip a switch? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. The first question, I think there'll be, I don't know how rapid it'll be, but I think the 7 EPA rules that I showed that were targeted toward coal plants, probably 6 of them will be rolled back hopefully within a year or so, but utilities have to plan 10 years out, and they're trying to decide, is this the most harmful one, which was a CO2 or the carbon rule out by the Biden EPA. It's before the Supreme Court as well. So I think we'll get a ruling on that. Not only is the Trump administration looking at rolling them back, but we also have some major court decisions that I think are going to come out in our favor on some of those overextended EPA rules. The second part of the question, Southwest Power Pool describes itself as a traffic controller at an airport. They can't decide how many planes are in the air. All they can decide is trying to land them at the right, or how many airports there are, power plants. So SPP doesn't control closing or opening a plant. It's there to control the lines and the transmission to try to make sure we balance out and have electricity at the right place at the right time. The utilities are the ones saying that they're going to be building wind, solar in the future. 13% will be base load. Now that's what Southwest Power Pool, that can change, but that's what they currently state. I don't see Southwest Power Pool being woke or anything. In most all the states in the Southwest Power Pool, the public utility commissions or the corporation commissions can't control whether a utility closes or opens or builds a new plant. they can control deciding whether they're going to be funded for building that new plant, their rate of return, whether they're going to get a rate of return for closing an existing plant. But it's really the utilities that decide whether a plant's going up or down. I don't know if that answered your question, Senator.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for working to try to get representatives from the Southwest Power Pool here, because I appreciate all the information that we've gotten about that, because it certainly is part of every one of our utilities' planning processes. But you talked about a commissioner, and certainly our KCC Commissioner Andrew French is on that. But my understanding was the Southwest Power Pool was really controlled by the utilities. It's a organization of the utilities, not of states. So they're developing plans that work for the utilities in terms of sharing power and day-ahead marketing.
They have stakeholder groups that the utilities are a part of. I know the board doesn't have utilities, it has the commissioners themselves. But the utilities are definitely a big part of coming together and deciding what they're going to be building. And again, some states in the Southwest Power Pool have this net zero, no fossil fuel regulation. New Mexico does, Louisiana, no, Montana, believe it or not, does. Some of them are just goals or executive from the governors, but it's causing a problem.
So again, Mr. Chair, when I'm looking at the map, just part of some of the states are in the Southwest Power Pool, because it isn't an organization that a state enters. It would be one that
It's utility-based.
utilities. But I do want to give you credit on your chart on the SPP and where power is coming from, because you clearly said that was at 2 a.m., and you're right, there was no solar at that time.
I should have looked at noon that day.
Any other questions? I'd like to have a couple questions. I'm proud of the committee today, a lot of good questions. On this one where it says SPP new generation, and at 13%, and it was thermal. I find that kind of interesting. Do we have any, I know in Utah, they have a thermal plant out there, I think. So is that kind of from something that's not on the pie to going to 13%? Somebody's thinking we're going to have a lot of stuff that happens in that area. I just wondered if you've been around. I know there's one in Utah, and I look at that, and then I look and say, well, gosh, Utah's one of the cheaper prices here.
Right.
Deal, and so I don't know. You might comment on that, and you might comment on the, when you look at the other three, Oklahoma, what's their magic pie that makes them so cheap? If you have any of your personal opinions on that.
No, Oklahoma has a lot of oil and gas, but they have a lot of wind generation as well in the western part of the state. I'm not sure exactly the reason why they might be lower than Kansas. Utah is definitely, it runs somewhere around 80% coal fuel generation. They have coal mines in Utah. Some of the plants are mine mouth, where they have the mine sitting right next to the power plant, and they don't have to put it on a railroad and take it anywhere. So it's a lot less expensive when you don't have, I'll give you a quick example. You can buy a ton of coal in Wyoming, 2,000 pounds for $14, but by the time you get it to the power plant here, it's somewhere around $36, $37. The rail cost of bringing it is, I don't know if there are railroads in the room, I might be in trouble, but anyway, some of that is rail cost that's associated with the increased cost. So you have a mine mouth situation, I think, a lot of times in Utah, which has made it a lot less expensive for their generation.
What about Nebraska?
Nebraska is 51 or 52% coal fuel generation now. I'm not sure why their prices are lower. They have twice as much coal generation, or a little close to twice as much as Kansas does. And they're a little closer to Wyoming as well.
My final question, being chairman, I get through here. When you look at the map of Wyoming and Colorado coming on, they're on one of your charts is showing kind of, if I'm looking at the chart right, kind of normal risk. So we kind of got two states coming in with normal risk that's going into above average risk.
That's true.
So I just kind of was wondering if you had any thought on what was happening with that.
I am not sure how NERC produced the normal risk, the blue area there. I will say that it is a very huge area which runs all the way through Washington, Oregon. There's a lot of hydropower in the northwest part of the U.S. state, which is very reliable and very low cost, next to nothing on cost. So I think that pours into it as well as the reason maybe why it's not as high a risk. There are some states, I think, like Colorado, that, as you saw, has higher electric costs, and I think will continue to go up. But as a whole, they show that that region is not, it's a normal risk instead of elevated. And my only thought is primarily the power in the northwest part of the U.S., Idaho, Washington, Oregon, that area.
Yeah, Senator Thompson.
Mr. Chair, and just one question. With the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a little over $270 billion in subsidies for green energy, wind, solar, stuff like that. That's not something an executive order can reverse. Do you have any insight on whether Congress has the appetite to take those subsidies back down?
I think there very much is, and it's, what is the, there's the one bill, I'm drawing a blank. There's one bill that can pass Congress with just a majority vote. It doesn't have to be 2/3. Reconciliation bill. So my understanding, and I don't do Washington, D.C., but my understanding is Congress is looking at rolling back the subsidies on wind and solar through the Reconciliation Act, where they can have, basically all they need is that one vote majority in the House or the Senate to get that through. Now, whether it happens or not, I don't know. I would say the renewable lobby is a lot stronger than the coal lobby, so.
And you're virtually unsubsidized, not completely, but virtually unsubsidized with regard to wind and solar, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Last question is Senator Holters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new to this committee, so I sometimes need a little bit more clarification. But if I'm thinking correctly, Nebraska is all public power, correct?
It is.
Okay, so if we're talking in that case, there's no investor-owned utilities, so no shareholders.
Right.
Okay, thank you for that
Up
clarification.
here. It's the only state in the U.S. that 100% of it is owned by the state.
Okay, I think that finishes up. It's 25 after. Randy, thank you for coming from Arkansas. And is there any announcements that need to be made? Or we won't have a meeting tomorrow, but we'll be setting an agenda, so we'll just have, well, our next meeting will be Tuesday. So with that, meeting adjourned. Thank you.